to get the energy and the juices flowing because I'm going to make some observations about India's payment systems and ask some uncomfortable questions. I think when we get together as leaders in the industry, we shouldn't just be patting ourselves on the back. We should be reflecting, are we doing the right things? Are we headed in the right direction, or should we do something different? And to help us do that, I'd like to just share with you some observations about payment systems as they are evolving, not just in India, but around the world. Okay? So I'll do that very quickly. So if you're not familiar with SWIFT, let me just briefly introduce us. So SWIFT is a strange animal. It's not a bank. It's not a financial institution. It's not an insurance company. It is a banking cooperative. It's a not-for-profit organization that operates globally. And every bank in the world, if you ever do a wire transfer overseas or use the SWIFT service, you are members, you are owners of SWIFT. Okay? We operate in more than 200 countries. We have more than 10,800 financial institutions on the network. We see over 27 million high and low value payments, securities, trade finance, and treasury transactions on peak days. In 2014, we had more than 5 billion transactions over the network. And in terms of value, every 3 days, the global GDP of the world goes over the SWIFT network, right? And so if you want to communicate with counterparties around the world, SWIFT is the way in which it's done. We are the digital mailman for the global financial sector. Okay? And what's our experience in payment systems? Sorry, one other thing I'll add, we're also very proud of the fact that because we're a not-for-profit organization, we don't have traditional commercial pressures. So we're not out doing many things. We want to do one thing, and we want to do it very, very well. So over 40 years of our existence, we've constantly reinvested profits into our infrastructure and into our expertise. And very, very proud to say, over 40 years, no transaction over the SWIFT network has ever been delayed, has ever been corrupted, has ever been lost. And we stand by that with a multi-million euro liability waiver. So if you send a transaction over the network, there's a delay, and you incur a business loss associated with that, we will cover you for that loss. Right? And that's never happened. So very proud of that. What's our experience in payment systems? So there are over 103 payment systems, national and regional payment systems that are on the SWIFT network. So banks and participants of these payment systems are using SWIFT as a channel to clear and settle their high and low value payments. So we feel we have some knowledge, some experience with which to share and reflect on what's happening with payment systems. Yeah, so if you look globally, typically there are two axes on which you can look at payment systems. They're traditionally either high value or low value. They're either real time or they're batch, right? You have low value ACH systems, and India has one. We have an NACH. We have traditional real time settlement systems that the RBI is operating in India, for example. So these are high value real time transactions that are cleared and settled. And then you have a bit of hybrids. High value batches sometimes are done through deferred net settlements. What we observe over the last 3 years is that you have convergence and hybrids. These systems are converging, and they no longer differentiate based on high and low value. Why should there be an artificial cutoff for a payment system? Why should it be 2 lakhs? If somebody wants to send 10,000 rupees and wants it to happen instantaneously, why don't we let them do that, right? So more payment systems are evolving towards that. One thing I want to highlight, NPCI and the Reserve Bank of India have done a wonderful job in bringing innovation to payment systems. We have in India today the IMPS, which is a real-time payment system. But one thing I would caution is that IMPS is a real-time clearing system. It is not a real-time settlement system. If in India you want electronic payments to replace cash, you want to pay your auto guy when you get out of the auto, if you want to buy vegetables on the street, that transaction has to be irrevocable, right? It has to be good as cash. If I hand over cash to somebody, it's in the other guy's pocket, he's confident, I've got the value that I was expecting. In IMPS, what can happen is that you can initiate a transfer But within 5–10 minutes, you may get an error back because the other bank didn't have funds with which to make the payment, right? So it is not 100% irrevocable, real-time payment that is happening with central bank money and central bank funds, okay? When I talk about real-time, low-value payment systems, the likes of Singapore, the UK, Australia are moving to real-time settlement. So in Australia, for example, within 15 seconds, I should be able to initiate a payment, it gets settled at the central bank, it gets deposited in the beneficiary's account, and I get a confirmation back. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Who's going to stick around longer than 15 seconds for money to exchange hands? After a while, you're going to give up and go away, right? So it has to happen on the order of seconds. So these are some of the new systems that are coming about on the international scale. What are the other key trends that are happening globally? So one, renewal. Many countries are on their second or first generation of payment systems. They are now beginning to renew them because obviously the technology has gotten old, they need to do a technology refresh, but they're using that as an opportunity to make business improvements. And really they're in two areas. National payment systems are no longer just clearing their own currencies, they're increasingly clearing other currencies. So Hong Kong, if you look at RMB, dollar, euro, and the local currency are going to get cleared through their payment system. Same thing in Malaysia. The other big thing that's happening is ISO 20022. And this is one thing I really want to emphasize in my short talk, is that if we are serious about financial inclusion, can we afford our payment systems to always be based on Latin characters? If somebody in Bhopal is going to go to Mumbai and work and send money back to their parents who are not English literate, can we really expect electronic payments to fully replace cash in the account? I don't think so. Our payment systems, the channels with which we communicate, the banks on the other end, and the vendors behind that, their technologies have to start supporting indigenous languages. That's when you're really going to start seeing penetration, particularly in India. In other countries, you have certain major languages. If you take care of those, you're going to have strong penetration. In India, we're highly fragmented. We're going to have to support non-Latin characters in our payment systems, and that will happen when we support the next generation of standards, and one of them is the ISO 20022 standard, which the RBI has already said is what the next generation system should be using. But that's not happening fast enough. Resiliency and reliability. Payment systems, increasingly the operators of those systems are aware that these are systemically important systems. If the RTGS went down today, you couldn't make oil payments. You couldn't make, business would come to a standstill, right? That cannot afford to happen. So it's not just good enough that the operators manage those systems with diligence, security, and focus, but the vendors who service them should be the same. So there are some emerging standards, some principles that are being established that says, if you operate a system, you must observe these standards, and your vendors must also observe those standards. Regionalization. I would challenge us as a nation not just to focus on the country. The South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC, represents 20% of the global population. It represents 7% of global GDP, third only to the US and China. And that's impressive, that is great. But if you look at intra-SAARC trade, one SAARC country trades with another SAARC country less than 3% of their transactions, of their national transactions. And we can't afford that to happen. We need to integrate with one another. We need to develop our capital markets. We need to lobby as a group, similar to what ASEAN is doing, similar to what other regions are doing, SADC in South Africa. We need to leverage the size and populace that we have. Regulation compliance, and then I talked about real-time payments. So these are some of the trends that we observe around the world. Now, just on India, let me make a few observations and challenge everybody here. So over the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of innovation in the industry. We now have real-time payments. We have a mandate management system. We have Aadhaar-based payments. We have a national ID system in the UID. That's great. There's been a proliferation of instruments and technologies. But a consequence of that is that that's not necessarily happened in a coordinated fashion, in a harmonized fashion. It's happened in a disparate manner, in a fragmented manner. The consequence of which is that if you look at the cost of bank intermediation as a nation, in the last 10 years, that's deteriorated. On average, in 2007, we used to be about 2.1%, which is the sort of the average percentage of cost of bank intermediation as a country. We are now at 4%, right? So life is more complex for bankers, it's more expensive for bankers, we need to be better coordinated, we need to have more efficiency in the system. If you look at individual institutions, if you look at a bank and benchmark them against global banks, global best practice banks, not necessarily the cities of the world, but the DBSs of the world, let's say, in Singapore. These are national banks, right? The level of standardization within the bank is below best practice. We tend to be complex institutions, and there's room for improvement there. I will skip this. It would be great to hear from the panelists and perhaps even a conversation with the participants on some of these things. We would, as an institution, SWIFT, would humbly put to you that these are the areas that we need to focus on when we talk about innovation in payment systems. One is we need to expand reach. We tend to have an attitude that one technology stack is sufficient for everybody. But the HDFCs of the world are not the same as the Saraswat cooperative banks of the world, right? Their capacity for technology, their capacity for complexity is not the same, right? We need to have more segmented technology stacks to service them and expand reach. We need to scale, right? I think we get very enamored by the numbers. Every year we are achieving now 30% increase in internet adoption. This past year, Jan Dhan Yojana has brought on board 27% higher number of bank accounts in a single year. We are now, depending how you measure, 50% of our population has some form of access to banking services. That's wonderful in terms of absolute numbers, but look at the usage within that. The most ambitious numbers I've seen say that only 5% of that 50% are active e-banking users, right? So we need to scale and not sacrifice stability in the process. And we need to look at our technologies very carefully. We talked about rich, uniform standards, supporting indigenous languages, an inclusive ecosystem. Why is it that only banks and only e-wallet users, perhaps, have access to our payment systems? Shouldn't it be open to more types of players? Obviously, the Reserve Bank restricts who can hold cash, right? Who is an account holder, right? There are only certain licensed institutions. But there are other aspects of payment systems. There is reference data. There are security aspects. There are channel providers. Should we not let everybody have an opportunity? Otherwise, if you think about it, if we only allowed BSNL to provide a mobile service in the country, it's a wonderful institution. It does a great job, but we would be underserved if we didn't have the Airtels of the world, if we didn't have the Vodafones of the world. You need to allow more players into the ecosystem. And then the last part, real-time settlement. We've done an excellent job with IMPS and other things around with NPCI, but can we take the next step? Real-time, irrevocable settlement such that a digital transaction is as good as cash. So these are things I wanted to share with you. I hope you find it valuable. Thank you.